now I'd just like to cover some of your comments from the earlier videos. So one of your comments says, it is weird how you can start to become somewhat aware of inappropriate behaviour, all the while having it manifest in other subtle ways. And so you don't notice that it's still happening, and maybe it's just morphed with age. And then you start to feel shame and guilt, and then that morphs into feeling unworthy of acceptance, which in turn can make change even more difficult to acquire. So yeah, that's very true in my experience. Just because you've become more self-aware doesn't mean that you can change your behaviour. I wish it was that simple. People seem to think that self-awareness is this amazing kind of, I don't know, it's like a sort of holy grail of development. Like, oh, you've reached self-awareness, now you can stop being so autistic and change your behaviour. You know you've got awareness now. Oh, it's a choice, people will think. Oh, because you've got self-awareness. Oh, it must be a choice. Because you are aware now, so why are you still doing this behaviour? It must be a personal choice, and then they blame you, of course. It's not as simple as that. All that self-awareness means is that you have developed to the extent that you are now kind of more aware of yourself and your relation to other people and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So on an intellectual, sort of cognitive, cerebral level, you've developed that understanding. But that doesn't mean that the two parts of your brain correspond with one another. Your left part of the brain, which is doing the introspecting, does not necessarily connect to the right part of the brain, which is the sort of part of the brain that is involved in executive functioning and impulse control and stuff like that. So you might be able to tell someone very clearly about your difficulties, and you might be able to tell them that you can act inappropriately, and be aware that you do that from time to time, and be able to give a full kind of analysis of it, and a person will think, oh, they're really self-aware and intelligent and they know it all, so why are they still doing it? Because the two parts of the brain don't connect, and then you're still inappropriate because you can't stop being inappropriate, and it's not a choice. I guess it's a bit like, say, obviously this is completely different, it's got no relation to autism, but I'm just using it as an analogy. Say like someone who's addicted to drugs and is aware that they're addicted to drugs, they're self-aware, but they still take the drugs. Similar sort of thing. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It's a mixed blessing, being self-aware, and then of course it can result in, because of this disconnect, as you mentioned in your comments, it can then result in feeling shame and guilt, and then feeling unworthy, and obviously that can then affect self-esteem, particularly when other people kind of imply that you should be able to control yourself, and that somehow it's a choice, and that you're just being awkward, or it's a character failing. And then you also make a point that this type of behaviour, there are varying consequences to this type of behaviour of acting inappropriate that may not come so easily for women, and also men and women of colour. So in other words, yes, indeed, so there are these intersectionalities at work. So obviously if you are a white male, particularly if you're from quite a sort of privileged background, you might be able to get away with more inappropriate behaviour, maybe not, but you certainly are more likely to get away with it. And if you are a woman, particularly if you're a woman of colour, obviously, then, particularly if you're a woman of colour, but also if you're a man of colour as well, then inappropriate behaviour could have all sorts of like really horrendous repercussions that someone who's white might not face. So I'm privileged in a sense that I'm white, and from quite a sort of privileged background, I guess you could say. And So I can't imagine what it's like, say, to be a person of colour and the potential repercussions of that. So that obviously comes with all sorts of, and that can then obviously affect the potential consequences of inappropriate behaviour in a public space as well. So yeah, there are all sorts of variables there, so that was a good comment. Okay, on a different subject now, one of you, I guess, is talking about the early masking comment. One of you said that you are an only child and your parents had no clue that anything was odd about you. I guess obviously because being an only child, yeah, your parents might not have had any kind of other children to like compare you with. But when you went to school, the teachers were adamant that something was very wrong and that you should be checked out. So that's interesting. And then another one of you says, in reference to masking, that masking full-time since a young child is BS. Bullshit. An excuse given by the neurodiversity advocates, as they had no childhood features. Yeah, indeed, I am very sceptical that this whole masking full-time from a young age is a thing. I just don't see how it's possible. I mean, I do think that masking does happen. It's not like a complete kind of. I mean, I think there is such a thing. It's not completely. What am I trying to say? Masking is a thing, but I think it's been taken to almost assume a sort of a mythic status that it doesn't have. So it's a thing in the sense that being autistic or coming from any marginal group comes with, I think, what they call minority stress, where you have this kind of sense of being different, the stress that comes with that, the need to sort of avoid stigma, so you try and control some of your behaviours. Obviously, you can only do this, of course, if you have the cognitive understanding to do so, obviously, but assuming you do have the cognitive understanding and the maturity to do that, I think trying to control certain parts of your behaviour to fit in does happen, and it's very tiring. I mean, it happens, I know for myself, I didn't have the name masking for it then, but I know that when I was a teenager, I began to try and like control myself in certain settings, like when I was talking to teachers and things like that, you know, to try and speak nicely, look them in the eye. Oh my god, so awkward. But you know, you try and do these things because you're constantly told, look people in the eye, smile, you know, ask them how they are. But of course, it doesn't come naturally, and it's incredibly tiring and exhausting. So I guess you could call that some degree of masking, but it wasn't successful. It didn't help me to make friends. I didn't have any understanding. It was all 100% mechanical. So masking does happen, but I don't think it happens in a way some people in the neurodiversity movement claim it happens. I don't think it can happen from very young childhood, because in order to be able to mask, you need to have developed socially enough to start to become aware of being different, and I certainly didn't have that understanding till I was a teenager. Obviously, it does vary from autistic to autistic. Some never develop that understanding, but I just don't think it's possible, no matter where you are in a spectrum in inverted commas, I just don't think it's possible for that to happen from the age of 4. So I agree with you that masking full-time since a young child is BS, I do agree. And I think this is a myth that the neurodiversity movement has sort of run with, and I just think it's quite damaging, because I just don't think it can happen. Anyway, and then in relation to the non-verbal autistic Murray in the programme Inside Our Autistic Minds, one of you said that given the research that needs to expand surrounding non-verbal autistics who cannot otherwise participate in cognitive testing, you do think that it is necessary to include a non-verbal autistic without significant intellectual disability, or rather one that clearly communicates in other ways and has a sense of agency that's visible to the public, even if it's a rarity. But the neurodiversity movements view misinformation and myths because they are a closed-minded group, and this then results in invalidating and erasing severe intellectual disability within autism. So yeah, I agree with you. We do need to hear these voices, as long as it's made clear it's not the norm. And I agree with you that severe intellectual disability within autism is being erased. It's hardly ever talked about anymore. It's almost like we've gone full circle. At one point in time, autism was only ever understood to go hand in hand with intellectual disability. Obviously, that was harmful because it meant that all the autistics without an intellectual disability didn't get the help and support they needed. And obviously, autism, even without an intellectual disability, can still come with very severe executive functioning difficulties and other things that need support. So it's essential that that myth was shattered. Of course, autism doesn't always occur with an intellectual disability, and it's possible to be autistic without an intellectual disability, or at least not a significant one. But now it's like we've gone full circle, and now it's like the only autistics you hear about. It's like they seem to have bypassed the middle group autistics, so they never include people like me. But it's like they've gone past from the really profound autism group to like extremely able ones. So now it's like gone full circle, it's gone the other extremes. Now you have people like Chris Packham, Melanie Sykes, all these like really able kind of minimally impaired people. I mean, Chris Packham isn't exactly impaired at all, is he? I don't even know why he got diagnosed, but there we go. Autistic personality, I would suspect, more than clinical autism, but you know, who am I to say? But anyway, they've completely kind of missed those in the middle. But yeah, they certainly have erased those with intellectual disabilities as well. It's never talked about anymore, never ever, and that is wrong and needs to change. So thank you for watching.